Alright, you guys, this episode of Paradigm Profiles is called Midnight Massacre in Goshen. Goshen is a small farming community that's about 15 minutes west of Visalia in Tulare County, California. Until the 20th century, Goshen was an island in a marsh at the edge of Tulare Lake, formerly the largest freshwater lake west of the Great Lakes until it was drained. Goshen is a predominantly Hispanic city with more than 70% of its slightly dense population being Raza. But the demographics are a diverse mix of Native Americans, Asians, African Americans, Caucasians, and other races. I've always thought of Goshen to be similar to other places in Northern California that are considered to be farm-like towns, such as Salinas, Castroville, Watsonville, Fresno, etc., etc. But for a small town with a population of just over 3,000 people, Goshen is growing and is an area that holds its own when it comes to crime, gangs, murders, and headline news. Over the years, Goshen is one of those small towns I've heard a lot about when it's come to NF activity, federal indictments, gangland-style killings, and other various forms of organized crime. Visalia, Farmersville, Porterville, Dinuba, Lindsay, Woodlake, Goshen, Early Mart, and even Pixley are all Tulare County cities that are active and are strife with crime. I've even heard about several Mexican Mafia members over the years who were operating in Tulare County and who had migrated from Southern California for the sole purpose of investing in some of the money-making ventures that were plentiful in the valley. Just under 3 years ago in 2020, 3 teenagers were shot and killed in a car near Golden West High School in Visalia. Law enforcement who investigated the crime indicated that their investigation of the initial shooting led to the discovery of a criminal enterprise that was operating across state lines and into the country of Mexico. They further indicated that the gang and its associates who were operating in the area were trafficking guns from Texas, and that they were paying for the weapons with meth and cocaine obtained from Mexican drug traffickers. This case had all the characteristics of a Mexican drug cartel, but the media stopped short of saying this. However, the events that just took place this last Monday on January 16, 2023 at around 3:38 a.m. in the small town of Goshen, California might make them reconsider their earlier assumptions that a Mexican drug cartel might be operating in the area. I'm sure that most people would agree that anytime an entire family is gunned down in cold blood, in an execution or cartel-style fashion, that it's always a tragedy, and that these are the types of crimes that terrify and shock whole communities. But it takes on an even more ominous effect when one of the victims turns out to be a young 16-year-old mother clutching her 10-month-old innocent baby. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in Goshen. 3 women, 2 men, and a 10-month-old baby were all executed and shot to death in what authorities are describing as one of the most horrific and bloodiest crime scenes that they have ever seen. The gunshot wounds were carefully inflicted with precision by targeting areas on the body that are known to cause instant death. When I take a minute to put that in perspective and think about it, this is the only characteristic that doesn't seem to be in line with the cartel's modus operandi. Cartel executions are usually gruesome. They tend to take particular interest in killing their victims in some of the most painful and excruciating methods that they can exact. They want their victims to suffer and feel every possible part of the process that they can inflict. Death usually comes slow and is an agonizing one as well. But even though the specific characteristics don't fit the cartel's typical method of operation, the brutality of the killings is definitely on par. Let's keep it real. Street gangs, prison gangs, and criminal organizations are all violent and have all been the subject of some controversial killings. But the one thing that they are all clearly against is the killing or the victimizing of innocent babies and children. I'm sure we all remember the 5 people that were killed in the Maxson Road murders. That incident involved an El Monte family that was gunned down and killed in the San Gabriel Valley. The victims included 2 intended targets, Mexican Mafia dropout Anthony Dito Moreno and his friend Gustavo Tito Aguirre. The other 3 victims included Dito's sister Maria Moreno, her 5-year-old daughter Laura Moreno, and her 6-month-old infant son Ambrose Padilla. All the victims were gunned down and slaughtered by a crew of Sangra gang members who were acting under the orders of Mexican Mafia member Luis Pelon Maciel. The original plan was concocted and hatched out by Mexican Mafia heavyweight Raymond Huero Shai Shyrock and several other Mexican Mafia members. At the time, the Eme was under an 18-month federal investigation that culminated in April of 1995. This investigation included several videotape meetings that were held in various locations by a number of different Mexican Mafia members. On January 4th, 1995, a meeting that was attended by 18 Mexican Mafia members was secretly recorded in a hotel room by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office and the lead detective, Sergeant Richard Valdemar. The meeting included Huero Shai, who had primary control over the San Gabriel Valley, an area in which El Monte is located. On the recording, Huero Shai stated, "I don't know if you ever heard of this brother named Dito. He dropped out a long time ago. Well, this motherfucker was living right there downstairs in an apartment and never came up. But once I moved out, this dude started showing his face. So somebody seen him and told me about it. But there's all kinds of people in the pad. There's a whole bunch of youngsters and kids and all kinds of shit. So I'm trying to figure out how to, well, I need a silencer is what I need. I just want to kill him, not the little kids." Huero Shai apparently lived in the same apartment complex with this individual named Dito and had identified him as being a dropout of the Eme. But Dito, apparently aware that Huero Shai was also living there, didn't start coming out of his spot until Huero Shai moved out. So at this meeting, Huero Shai was laying the groundwork for the hit. In the second meeting on April 2nd, 1995, Pelon walked into a Mexican Mafia meeting that Sergeant Valdemar was again monitoring electronically. At the meeting, Huero Shai put Pelon up for membership and raised his hand as a sponsor, saying, "This dude has gone way above and beyond the call of duty. Man, this motherfucker is sharp. He's taking care of a lot of business. I know the brothers don't know him, but take my word for it, the motherfucker's down. I'm not talking about just violence either. He takes care of business real good, and he's downed a whole lot of motherfuckers in this last year. And he went against his whole neighborhood for us. He's been fighting with them and downed them. And when one of his homies killed that 1-year-old baby a few months ago, he's the one that took care of them. This incident and the Maxson Road murders is how Pelon earned his bones and was ultimately voted into the Mexican Mafia." Dito was targeted and killed because he was an Eme dropout, but his boy Tito was targeted because he was apparently robbing and burning street dealers that were paying taxes to the Mexican Mafia. Pelon was the one who was tasked with arranging the hit and organizing the crew of hitters who would carry it out. The crew included Sangra gang members Jimmy Character Palma, Richard Primo Valdez, Danny Tricky Logan, and Anthony Scar Torres. Prior to the killings, Pelon told the crew of Sangra gang members to make sure they left behind no witnesses. I'm sure Pelon didn't mean this to include babies and other kids. However, these guys took this statement literally and ended up killing Maria's 6-month-old son Ambrose and her 5-year-old daughter Laura. Character, the actual killer who shot the kids, was eager to put in work for the Eme. He wanted to take full advantage of this opportunity to earn his bones and prove to the Eme that he was willing to spill blood on their behalf. But Character was a little too eager. He overshot his chance to make his mark when he killed the kids because the Eme doesn't believe in killing babies. In fact, the Eme is firmly against it. After the murders, the media began a nationwide smear campaign against the Mexican Mafia. On practically every news station, they were calling the Eme baby killers, cowards who were responsible for killing innocent children. The Eme's character and its reputation as a stand-up organization was being shredded and ripped apart by the media everywhere. Meanwhile, leaders in Pelican Bay State Prison were furious and were trying to figure out who was responsible for this. At the time, they had no idea. All they knew is that the carnales on the streets were somehow connected and that someone out there had stamped it. It took a few weeks for communication to begin trickling down and for the information to get facilitated, but eventually all the facts came to light. Although Tricky and Scar participated in the killings, Character and Primo were the actual shooters. Later on, when seasoned homicide detectives arrived at the scene, some of them were literally in tears. These were guys that seen death on a regular basis, but this was a different kind of death. The babies are what broke them down. Most of them had kids themselves, so the sight of 6-month-old Ambrose was a tough image to look at. But what was even worse than that was the sight of 5-year-old Laura clinging to her mother's leg. The little girl was still breathing, barely, but she was almost to the point of her final death rattle. She was covered in blood, and there was a small trail of blood that clearly showed that the child had crawled so that she could be next to her mother, where she now clung to her and fought to take her last couple of breaths. Tricky and Scar received life sentences, but Pelon, Primo, and Character all received the death penalty for their roles in the murders. Primo and Pelon were smart. They seen the writing on the wall, and they knew what kind of fate lied ahead for them. And they weren't taking no chances. Both of them locked it up and refused to go to the active Mexican Mafia Aryan Brotherhood yard that they would have been assigned to on San Quentin's death row. But Character wasn't so smart. He didn't see what was in store for him, and he obviously didn't understand the gravity of what he had done. He assumed that the work he put in would earn him big points with the MA, and that he'd be embraced with open arms by the Emeros on death row. But they had other plans. He broke one of the MA's cardinal rules, a code of conduct that held serious consequences. The MA was being referred to as baby killers, cowards, and as an organization that was responsible for killing innocent children. At that point, there was only one way to clean this up and to try to mitigate the circumstances that they were now faced with. The controversy that was being spun by the media would only slow its spin by meting out a form of Mexican Mafia justice. Character had to go. They would have to spill Character's blood and make him pay for what he did with his life. I was there in San Quentin when this incident happened. When Character went out to the Mexican Mafia Aryan Brotherhood yard, they made him do a full rutina, exercises consisting of burpees and calisthenics, and then they made him play a couple of games of basketball. But this was all a ruse. They just wanted to get Character's blood pumping vigorously through his veins so that when they would end up plunging a 5-inch steel spike into his heart, he would bleed out in a matter of seconds. After Character was hit, every AB member and every MA member took their time leaving the yard to guarantee that too much time would elapse for medical staff to render any medical aid to Character. This was a way to basically ensure that he was dead and that there would be no chance of preserving his life. So this just goes to show you how serious the MA and other California games are when it comes to killing babies. It's bad business. I believe that this is why law enforcement is now looking at the cartels as being responsible for perpetrating these murders. A law enforcement spokesman for the media said that the killings appeared similar to high-ranking gang executions and the style of executions they commit because the victims were shot in places where a shooter knew that quick death would occur. After considering the process of elimination, it makes practical sense that this was probably cartel related. Who else whacks a 16-year-old mother clutching her 10-month-old baby? Investigators said that forensic evidence showed that the shooter or shooters stood over the young mother and her son before pumping bullets into both of their heads, and that before they were executed, they were running for their lives. That takes a certain level of rage and anger to do something like that. The other reason that there's a lot of speculation being waged at the cartels is because of the drugs that were involved and some of the history that this particular residence has been associated with. The victims were identified as Marcos Parras 19, Eladio Parras 52, Alyssa Parras 16, her 10-month-old son Nicholas Parras, Alyssa's grandmother Rosa Perez 72, and Jennifer Anaya 49, who was described as being a close friend of the families. Local police released a statement indicating that Alyssa, along with her son and grandmother, were all innocent victims. However, they stopped short from calling Jennifer an innocent victim, along with Marcos and Eladio, who were referred to as active gang members. They also indicated that there were 3 other people who survived the shooting because they apparently hid right before the shooting started. Understandably, these killings have shocked the Goshen community, and people are now on edge. Law enforcement have tried assuring people that this was not a random act, and that this was a very specific targeted act of violence. The shooting is one of 32 mass shootings in the United States so far this year. As of Tuesday, 17 children aged 11 and younger died by gunshot wounds so far this year, while 24 suffered injuries. Police who are investigating the shooting seem to think that there's at least 2 shooters who were involved, but they're not saying why. My guess is that there's probably 2 different caliber guns that were used, and that 3 surviving victims might have possibly seen something. One survivor described hearing shots ring out in the home as he lied flat inside a room, pushing his feet against the door to keep it closed. He heard at least one of the shooters rattling the doorknob before they walked away. Imagine that. There's no doubt in my mind that this guy probably feels like he was as close to death as he's ever been. He was in such a state of fear that all he could do was hold the door, hoping that he was not the next victim. The 2 other survivors hid in a nearby trailer, where one of the victims was shot in the threshold of the trailer door. Fortunately, the 2 suspects in this case never entered the trailer, otherwise he would have been a 7th victim. Again, police are saying that they are being methodical and slow-paced about releasing details and information because they believe that the killers might be watching. But some of the information that they did release surrounded a narcotics warrant that was issued just days before the shooting. Roughly 2 weeks before the shooting, deputies with the Tulare County Sheriff's Office found shell casings outside the home on January 3rd when they were attempting to conduct a parole compliance check. Compliance checks are done by law enforcement on people who are on felony parole to ensure they're following the law. At the time, deputies asked to go inside the home, but people in the house refused. Deputies returned with the warrant and found marijuana, methamphetamine, guns, and body armor. Eladio Parras, one of the shooting victims, was arrested for being a felon in possession of ammunition, firearms, and a controlled substance. He was released on bail 4 days later. Unfortunately for Eladio, this was probably the one time that he wished he wouldn't have gotten bailed out. So as the investigation progresses, it's still anybody's guess who the perpetrators are and what type of organization they belong to. One thing's for sure, if they didn't know there would be any blowback from killing innocent babies and a younger mother, they definitely know now. I'm sure that wherever they are, they've seen some of the news coverage and what type of brush they're being painted with. Honestly, instead of these guys getting caught and facing criminal prosecution, I'd personally rather see them face the same kind of justice that Jimmy character Palma did in San Quentin at the hands of those who despise baby killers. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. As always, we appreciate you guys for tapping in and of course for always showing your support. We're already working on more profiles and videos for you guys, so be looking out for those to drop sometime in the near future. On that note, this one's in the history books, but again, we appreciate you guys for all the positive support, all the positive feedback, and just for helping us grow as a channel. We realize that without you guys, the viewers, we would cease to exist.